What's up guys, ArchAngel Manga here, and I know it's been a while, but you are now watching part 2 of Tezuka season. My last Tezuka season video was in November last year, and that was Doro, so this is part 5, and the second part of Tezuka season. Hopefully I'm going to wrap up all my Tezuka season videos, within this part. If not, then maybe there'll be part 3, depending on, how long it takes me to get through Tezuka season and all the Tezuka manga that I've got to read. But in this installment, we're going to be talking about Triton of the Sea. If you haven't seen any of my Tezuka season videos, I'll leave a link to the playlist in the description below. But basically, Tezuka season is basically a series of videos where I take a chronological and retrospective look at the manga of the godfather of manga himself, Osamu Tezuka. Now on to Triton of the Sea. Some of his works from the late 60s and early 70s. I believe this was penned in 1969 to 1970 or 71 maybe. And basically it's a story of the fabled kingdom of Atlantis and its citizens who once lived there. And basically the Triton family, who resided in Atlantis like 5,000 years ago, were very successful, flourished, had just brilliant lives until the Poseidon family, which was basically their rivals, just basically wiped them all out of envy and jealousy. Now, basically, that's kind of like the first few opening pages, and basically it's set in like a present day sort of setting. It's basically about the last surviving member of the Triton clan, Triton, and he's basically found on a beach in Japan by a boy named Kazuya, who has long had an infatuation with like sea life and things like that, and has always seen like strange lights on like a certain reef. So he finds the baby Triton, takes him home, and he's warned by his grandma that a boy called Triton will bring great suffering to the human world. Basically, she prophesizes everything. And for the first third of the first volume, like the main character is actually Kazuya, this Japanese boy. And I find his story really interesting because the prophecy that his grandmother foretells, starts coming into fruition, because in taking in this boy from the sea, Triton, bad things start to happen: tsunamis, earthquakes, things like that, and everything that his grandma prophesied, starts to come true, and he ends up losing his dad. So, as a result, Kazuya, Triton, and his mother move away from the village that they live by the sea, and they move to Tokyo, where they try and make a life there. Kazuya gets a job, and basically his life just spirals down. He gets mixed up with some really bad people in Tokyo who are more like streetwise and more kind of they basically take advantage of his like naivety of the city, because he's just like a country bumpkin who just who lives near the sea. So basically swindle him out of his wages, to the point where Kazuya basically has like a breakdown, and ends up basically killing. At which point he becomes a fugitive and starts working on a boat. And the way the story kind of goes from there is like really, really interesting. But then basically he just disappears. He becomes a fugitive, and he just kind of like disappears, and then like the central protagonist shifts over to Triton as he grows up. And I feel that this is where the problems for the manga kind of start for me, because I like the manga generally. I liked it, but from what I've read of Tezuka so far, I can definitely say that this is unfortunately my least favourite Tezuka title that I've read. Now I'm going to explain why I think this, and this is nothing to do with the story. I think the premise and the story of this is brilliant. I love the premise of this, and there are aspects of this manga that I really, really enjoyed. But one thing that makes this story suffer a lot is its pacing, and there's a good reason why I think that the pacing in this manga is bad. And that is, each page, this is a manga that was serialized weekly, or it wasn't serialized in a manga anthology. Each page was serialized every day in like a newspaper. So basically, each page tells its own sort of little story within a scene, and like the last panel on each page is almost like a sort of cliffhanger, or like a joke or something like that. So as a result, the pacing really suffers, because there's no sort of like consistency to like the timeline or anything like that. and this isn't helped by the fact that the way Tezuka depicts the mermaid, the mermen in this series is they don't grow like regular human like people. They basically they grow in like, it's difficult to explain. They have periods where they're a certain age, and then all of a sudden they'll just grow to like to another age, like in a period of like an hour. So like Triton is basically, he's a baby, and then he'll be a baby for a certain duration of time, and then he'll turn into a toddler like within an hour, and then like and then he'll have another period where he's, you know, a period of time where he's a toddler, and then out of nowhere he'll just turn into like, you know, like a teenager or something like that, and that's how the mermen grow. They basically kind of digress into a sort of like coma like state where they basically grow, you know, just basically mature, and that really doesn't help with the pacing because, you know, you can't really get a grasp for the sort of time scale that this manga works with. The entire manga, you don't know whether it happens in a few months, a few years. Seemingly it's years and years and years by the time you get to the end, but there's no real clear indication for this, and that's why I didn't really kind of like the flow of the manga, and that's kind of where my, you know, lack of enjoyment comes in with it, because it's really difficult to kind of gauge like what time period this stretches over, and it makes it for a really awkward read. I find, you know, because I suppose reading it, you know, one page per day, you know, like when it was originally serialized, you know, in newspapers, it would have been a lot easier to kind of grasp then. But when you combine it into a book and try reading it like marathon all the way through it, it just makes it for a really awkward, you know, kind of fumbled read, which I didn't really appreciate. And what really annoyed me is for the fact that the story is actually really good, and the characters. You know, some of the characters, especially Kazuya, who is like the protagonist of like the first half of the first volume, you know, he's actually a really good character, and he basically just gets kind of like pushed like to, he isn't even a side character anymore. He just disappears from the manga, and then we see him like, you know, like seemingly years later, when, you know, he's been through all like the trials and tribulations that he needs to have, you know, gone through, and he's a completely changed man by the time you see him next, and all the character development that he went through like in the first volume, it's just, you know, there's no sort of recompense for that. There's no sort of like hark back to that, you know, the struggles that he went through, because it's so central and centered around Triton and his revenge against the Poseidon clan, and Poseidon himself, because basically the Poseidon clan is still flourishing because obviously they've wiped out the Triton clan. You know, they've basically had no natural enemies, so they've been able to basically take over all the kingdoms of the sea, take over all the animals and everything, you know, in the sea, and are basically plotting to take over the world. The next plot is to attack the human world, and Triton, obviously, you know, he's trying to stop this, and because Kazuya was like my favorite character in this series, I just felt that he was just heavily neglected because he, you know, he had such a spotlight in the start of the manga, which really kind of got me into the manga. And then for the rest of the manga, I was just waiting for him. Right, when is Kazuya going to come back? Like, what place can Kazuya take? You know, like within, you know, the you know, what basic purpose does Kazuya now have in Triton's life? Because Triton is so, you know, he becomes so removed from the human world because Triton grows up in Tokyo with his mother and decides to go back to the sea. By the end of it, it's almost like he never even came from the human world. It's almost like he was never raised from the human world because he's so focused on his mission to, you know, basically be liberated from the Poseidon clan and basically, you know, get revenge for the genocide of his people. So it's basically like a fabled revenge tale, which personally I don't think was, you know, told very well due to the pacing. However, you know, I would recommend this manga because there are some really interesting scenes in this. There's lots of different creatures that Triton, sorry, has to kill, because in order to kill Poseidon, Triton has to kill Poseidon's 33 children, and those scenes, you know, the monsters and stuff that Tezuka creates are like really creative, and you know, obviously you can really see the flair of his imagination. And there's a point where Triton and Poseidon basically enter into a truce to defeat, like, you know, basically a common enemy, and that was a really interesting part as well. That was actually probably one of my favorite parts of the manga, where Poseidon and Triton basically enter into an uneasy alliance in order to defeat a common enemy. You know, that was a really interesting part of the manga, and the ending as well. Definitely Tezuka puts his signature flair in the end. But without spoiling it, the ending was actually really good. I was very impressed with the ending. And there are really, there's basically secondary characters that come into it that are, like interesting, but they don't get used to the maximum effect because the pacing is just so bad. However, though, I would still recommend this manga. If you're into sort of like Tales of the Sea, mythology and kind of the history of ancient civilizations, then I guess you should pick this manga up. If you like manga that have like heavy elements of tragedy and adventure and basically a mixture of everything, there's some romance elements in this as well. Then I do highly recommend this, and obviously if you're an avid Tezuka reader, then obviously it goes without saying that I recommend this. But personally, I can't see myself reading this again in the near future. Maybe I will pick it up again and maybe try and give it a second chance, but as it stands now, it's not really one of my favourite Tezuka titles. It's probably the least one that I'm interested in rereading. But still, I'm glad to have read it. I don't regret reading it because all in all, parts of it were enjoyable. It just took me a long time to get through this because the pacing was so bad. I think that's what really made me sort of not enjoy reading it, because it was just such a drag to read through because of the pacing. So that's basically my own issue with the manga, is it got bad pacing. The artwork, it was okay. Paneling, there was no sort of like, dynamic paneling where, like Tezuka really uses, his imagination when it comes to the paneling, which was kind of surprising because it was serialized, like, page by page, like day by day. I would have imagined that Tezuka would have used more dynamic paneling, basically to kind of, accentuate each page, like from, basically day after day, because of it's serialized day by day. So I would have imagined that Tezuka would have, been a little bit more inventive with the way he panelled the story out, but, guess not. So, there's not really much I can say on that. There's nothing really special about the artwork. It wasn't bad. The paneling wasn't, great. What can I say? Story, very good story. Still recommend it. So basically, that's all I've got to say on Triton of the Sea. Read it if you need to. If you're a fan of Tezuka, read it. But I wouldn't go out of my way to purchase this. If you want to do, then I will leave a link to my book depository affiliate link in the description below, where you can basically get any manga you want with the free worldwide shipping, and I get commission off the sales. So if you want to pick this up, head down to that link in the description below. And until then, ArchAngel Manga, signing out.